What's up everybody, Brian here with BPS Customs, and today we're going to take a closer look at this chip. This is the Intel Skylake i3-6300. So those of you familiar with my channel know that I do a video series called The Best PC You Can Build. You can find the first entry into that series in this video up here if you click on the card. When I was doing research into this second entry into this series to try to figure out what the best configuration would be for a $750 to $800 gaming PC, I was really kind of stuck on which processor to use. Obviously I wanted to stay Intel, and I wanted to also stay current generation socket. So that meant Skylake or I guess Broadwell E. Given that the high-end Broadwell E chip costs about $1,700, I decided it wouldn't have been the best choice for a $700 build. That is expertise for you. Also math. But for real, what I was actually struggling with was whether or not to go with an i5 or an i3. Now the i5 that I would have to go with for a $700 to maybe $800 build couldn't be the 6600K, it's a little bit out of the price range. I could, however, have gone with a 6500 or 6400 locked SKU i5 for somewhat of a reduced cost compared to the 6600K. But when I started doing research into the i3s, two chips really caught my eye: the 6100 and the 6300. Now the reason that these really caught my attention were because of their higher clock speeds and hyper-threading. So you're running 4 virtual cores even though you are still only running 2 physical cores. This obviously doesn't mean the performance is going to literally be double that of a 2-core chip. However, it is significantly increased over a dual-core chip with no hyper-threading like the Pentium G4400. Seeing as this build's main purpose is going to be for gaming, I want to see what kind of performance I could squeeze out of one of these i3s in gaming applications. Thus, we got this guy. This is the Intel i3-6300. This is a Skylake chip. It's built on their 14 nanometer process. Came out about the same time as all the other Skylake chips between like August and October of last year. But the thing that really attracted me to it was the clock speed. The 6300 runs at 3.8 gigahertz, and although it doesn't turbo boost, a base frequency of 3.8 gigahertz is actually a higher clock speed than a lot of other chips Intel is putting out. Chips like the i5-6600K. Now I'm going to throw a graphic up on the screen because I want to talk about the differences between the i3 and the i5. So if you take a look at the chart, the differences here between the chips are highlighted in yellow for you. So the first difference is that the i5 is going to support 6 megs of cache versus the i3's 4 megs of cache. Additionally, obviously, also the i5 is a quad core, whereas the i3 is a dual core with hyper-threading. The i5 also does run at 91 watts TDP as opposed to just 51 watts for the i3. They both sport 16 PCIe lanes, but you can see that the base clock of the i5 is only 3.5 gigahertz. It does turbo up to 3.9, and obviously it's an unlocked SKU, so you're going to be able to squeeze some more performance out of it by overclocking. However, does that really matter in today's games? So what today's video is going to be about is I'm going to do a bunch of tests on the i3, the i5, and this chip. This is the 5820K, and I figured I'd just throw that in there. So in gaming applications, I fully expect the 6600K to outperform the i3, but I don't think it's going to be by much. Additionally, I am actually really curious to see how the 5820K gets in there and tangles with the Skylake chips that are actually more targeted towards gaming than the X99 series is. So if you guys watch my $1,000 build video, you'll know that I put the i5-6600K in an Asus Z170i Pro Gaming motherboard with 16 gigs of Corsair DDR4. So in order to keep things consistent, I'm going to put the i3 in the exact same motherboard with the exact same RAM. Granted, the tests on the i5 were done with a 4.4 gigahertz overclock. However, I think this is actually a fair way to do things, as the i3 does not support overclocking. So technically, both chips are being run at their maximum frequency. The 5820K was a little bit of a different story because obviously I can't plop that into the same motherboard. What I did for those numbers is I ran the tests on an Asus X99 Sabertooth motherboard with 16 gigs of Crucial Ballistics DDR4. Yes, the test setups are not identical for the 5820K. No, I don't think this is going to make a significant difference. The video card used in these tests was the same across the board, the reference style AMD RX 480 with no overclock applied. So let's take a look at some charts right now, and I'm going to talk you guys through the numbers as we do so. So the first test we're going to take a look at is Firestrike. Now, while you can see the graphics scores for all three systems are within the same ballpark, the total system score is obviously skewed by the processor itself. Now, while the i3 does put up a respectable 8969, the i5 obviously beats it out by 100 points at 9947. and the 5820K blows them both away at over 11,000. This is really not a surprise here because the physics part of Firestrike really does depend on the CPU, and the more cores you have, the higher your score is going to be. Moving on to Heaven, we can see that the i3 and the i5 returned almost identical scores. Now, the difference of 0.5 frames per second is within the margin of error, and I don't think that that is significant in any way. However, you can see that the 5820K does come in under 73 frames per second, and although it's not a huge difference, I would certainly say the spread between the i3 and the 5820K is significant in our testing, even though it really isn't significant in the real world. Moving on to Metro Last Light, we start to see a pattern develop. The i3 and the i5 score almost identically once again, with the 5820K coming in a little bit behind. This time, however, the difference is a little bit greater, and you can see there's approximately a 4 frames per second spread between the Skylake chips and the Haswell E chip. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, I had some pretty wacky things happen here with this benchmark. Now, while the 6600K and the 5820K scored in the same ballpark, the i3-6300 scored over 77 frames per second in this test. I cannot explain this result. I reran the test 6 different times because I could not believe the results that I was getting. The results range between 75 and 78 frames per second each time with consistency. I then reran my i5 test because I did not understand the results I was getting, and I came out with a very similar score. If anybody has any explanation as far as why this might have been happening, please let me know because I am curious and I do not have an answer. Nevertheless, very impressive result from the i3. Maybe if you're going to play Rise of the Tomb Raider, you should definitely buy an i3. Moving on to our second DX12 benchmark, Ashes of the Singularity, we could see that this title is likely more CPU intensive than the rest of the titles in our testing suite. The 6600K and the 5820K put quite a bit of distance between themselves and the i3 in this game. And lastly, we're going to take a look at the division. All 3 processors scored almost identically here, and there's really no reason to believe that the CPU has any impact at all, as long as you're not bottlenecking your GPU. So I gotta be honest, the results I got here for the i3 were really impressive. Earlier on in the video, when I was talking about how I was kind of struggling between choosing the i3 and the i5 for a budget build, I didn't really take into consideration, it didn't really cross my mind, that the i3 actually might be better at some things than the i5. Granted, CPU-intensive tasks like video editing and things of that nature are not going to be optimal with an i3, but if you're just gaming, this might actually be the way to go, especially if you're on a budget. You're going to save yourself about $100 over the 6600K if you go with something like the 6300. You're probably going to save yourself some money on a motherboard because you can go with an H170 or B150 chipset. And you're not going to notice any degraded performance in any of the games that I tested. Speaking of degraded performance, I recently read a very interesting study that said that my viewers could suffer degraded performance if you don't get subscribed to the channel. Degraded performance at work, at home, in bed. You guys don't want that. You should probably just get subscribed. Also, check out some of my other content if you guys want to see a review of the video card used in these tests, the RX 480, or perhaps the GTX 1070, or the 1080, or the 1060. I'm really tired of reviewing video cards. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.